Good evening, everyone. I'm David Johnson from Transform Ed Consulting. It's my pleasure to have as our guest tonight, 𝐾𝐨𝐬 Johnson. Hello, 𝐾𝐨𝐬.
Hello, how are you
How
doing?
are you doing this evening?
Pretty good. Trying to stay
Doing
warm,
good,
but
doing
doing
good.
good.
We're in San Antonio. Yeah, we're in
Yes.
San Antonio. It's going to be 15 degrees tonight.
I can't believe it. I cannot believe it.
Did you bring all your plants inside?
I actually bought a nice cover. So my mother is very good with plants and she reminded me get the cover. So I have that and they are covered and ready to go.
Great, or great. Well, let me formally introduce you here. 𝐾𝐨𝐬 D. Johnson, MBA, is Director, Office of Student Life, UT Health. In this case, UT is the University of Texas, San Antonio, Texas. She leads a department that enhances the student experience through co-curricular programming focused on student leadership, wellness, and community building. Along with her director duties, she serves as a student ombudsperson and foster care liaison. She also serves in multiple Title IX related roles. Mrs. Johnson is a published co-author of journal articles focused on co-curricular interprofessional education. Her work has resulted in opportunities and awards such as the Leadership Excellence for Academic Professionals Program and the Presidential Award for Employee Excellence, respectively. Mrs. Johnson is motivated by her passion to help students discover their purpose and achieve their personal and professional goals. Welcome, 𝐾𝐨𝐬.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm interested. You have an MBA, but you're working in student affairs. How did that happen? How did you get there?
Oh, I stumbled into it, but I'm so glad I did. It was the best stumble ever. So I did start off in business school, focused on preparing to work in corporate America, and that was my aim the whole time. But being a person of faith, I feel like God's providence kind of took over, and so the doors didn't really open in corporate America, but they slowly opened in education. So I started as a graduate assistant while earning my MBA, and have been in higher education ever since then.
Now, people go to school to study student affairs. How did you make that jump from business to students?
I like to say I'm a nerdy person. So one of my top five strengths, if Strength Finders is your thing, is learner. That's actually my number one strength. And so I think my willingness to learn really helped me with that. So I learned on the job. I learned from great mentors along the way. I've been to countless conferences and workshops. And then some things I think were just kind of innate. Like I feel like, this is what I was designed to do in this season of my life. And so I think the combination of all of that really helped kind of shape my career in student affairs.
Now, in your bio in brief here, there are some interesting things. What is co-curricular interprofessional education?
Great question. So interprofessional education really helps, particularly students who are studying for healthcare and science, to gain the skills to work together collaboratively. There's a saying that like healthcare is a team sport. And so when you think about patient care and patient outcomes, you want different professionals to be able to work together in order to provide that high level care, safety, and all the great things that we need for our patients. So interprofessional education helps to kind of train students how to do that. And co-curricular IPE is really kind of what it sounds like. It's using kind of co-curricular or extracurricular activities to help build the competencies needed to work as a team when you talk about working in healthcare and serving patients.
You sound like an educator with an MBA. Who would have thunk?
I know, right? I tell you. Okay, we'll get more into how it happened later, but yes, I definitely am an educator.
Uh-huh. I think it might be helpful for our audience to know what UT Health is.
Absolutely. So UT Health San Antonio is what's called an academic medical center. You also have here heard health related institution. And so we actually are not only a clinical environment, but we are an actual university. So we have 5 schools. We have a school of medicine, a school of dentistry. We have a school of health professions. We have a school of nursing. We have a biomedical sciences school. So we average close to 4,000 students amongst all of these respective schools.
And what would you say the profile of your students is? Are they undergraduates, graduates, going on to medical school, or would we call UT Health a medical school?
So great question. So, primarily the average age is about 25. So most of our students are going to be in a graduate school kind of area where they're earning a PhD or a doctorate level degree. We do have a few programs that are traditional, undergraduate programs. So that's kind of really kind of the snapshot, of our student body. I would be reluctant to say we're a medical school. I think working in this space, you want to be very particular about that. So we love our medical school, but we don't want to unintentionally ignore all the other professions that make up the healthcare space. So I personally would not call an academic medical center a medical school. I think it's important to acknowledge the academic and the healthcare side of things.
Well, Lakeisha, I am so glad to have you here this evening, particularly because of the topic that we will be discussing. The title is Overcoming Imposter Syndrome in Student Affairs. And in my mind, I'm seeing at least two different topics here: imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, and then student affairs. So could we talk a little bit about imposter phenomenon first?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
From your knowledge, what would be a clear, succinct, perhaps, definition of imposter phenomenon?
For me, experientially, and also just some of the, kind of studying I've done, it's really that self-doubt. It's a feeling of self-doubt that you have, that you don't have, if you will, what it takes to achieve a certain goal or do a certain task or be in a certain role. And coupled with the self-doubt is almost a fear. It's like, I have this self-doubt and I'm afraid others are going to find me out, So I think you kind of fake it till you make it, if you will. But internally, there's kind of this internal dialogue going on. So that's what I would say. It's more of a self-doubt that's coupled with this feeling of not being able to accomplish a certain task or goal and trying to keep that hidden so that others aren't aware of what you're dealing with.
Now, a common term that you use, and we've used many times in schools: fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it, yeah.
Doesn't that itself puts a person in jeopardy of being found out, so to speak?
It actually does, but I think it's, I've experienced imposter syndrome, and I think it's a way of almost coping with what you're dealing with. So it's like, I'm gonna pretend like I know what I'm doing, but internally I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going on. But I think there's ways that I know I found in my experience to overcome that and to manage that when that feeling arises. But yes, that is a risk that's involved with that.
There's an expression we used to say back in the 70s, and that is, that is, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean someone's not really out to get me. So
it might be real. Just because it might actually be real. I got you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you the experience of a good buddy of mine.
Sure.
A very, very good buddy of mine. He was hired for a job, and after 2 months, his boss called him in and said, "You misrepresented yourself on your resume," and he got fired.
Oh my
and
God.
When I say misrepresented himself, he didn't lie. He just said he knew how to do these various things, and when when he got to work, his boss concluded that he had promised more than he could deliver.
Oh, wow.
So now how would imposter syndrome or phenomenon fit with that occurrence, an occurrence such as that?
Oh, that's a great scenario. So I'm assuming when he read the actual job description, like, okay, how do I align, what I'm going to put on my resume with what's expected for this position? So if I understand your question correctly, are you asking me why he did that in the first place, or how to respond when he got let go because of that particular incident?
See, in my mind, I see that as just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're really not out to get me. So
Okay.
So maybe he wasn't feeling that he was being an imposter, but the truth was
The person that was kind of assessing his skill set felt like he was.
Exactly. So in your experience, has that ever happened, and how would one explain that?
So I personally have not embellished what I'm able to do. I try to be fair and honest, but I think where I've experienced imposter syndrome is like getting into like maybe you're promoted into a different role. I've had different roles over the course of my career. I've been an educator for almost 20 years now. And inevitably you get in a new job or you get a new responsibility and you kind of have to perform. You got to do the job, but at the same time you're like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And there's reasons for why that self-doubt in me occurred. So, I'll give an example. One of the when I stepped into as an academic advisor, that was the first job that I really had. Then the light bulb went off that like, oh, I love working with students. I love working in student affairs. This is what I want to do. But I didn't know how to be an academic advisor, a degree plan, all the things that you need, right? And so you're doing the job and you're trying to learn it, but you're like, I don't really know how to do this. So there's things that I did to help to cope with that. And so one of those things is like to build my competency, because that's one of the things I think that contributes when I have imposter syndrome. It's because there's a competency gap that I need to fill.
Well, that leads right into our agenda for this evening. So let me restate our topic: overcoming imposter syndrome in student affairs. And I should clarify, I've been saying imposter phenomenon instead of imposter syndrome because by the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, there's no such thing as imposter syndrome. So technically they refer to it as imposter phenomenon. And we've all experienced it. Many people will, like you said, we continue to experience it. Every time you're presented with a new challenge and you've got to start from scratch, like you said, close the gap, chances are you're going to experience imposter phenomenon. So let's jump in. Where would you like to start?
Let's start with the beginning. So I feel like for me, we're talking about practice self-acceptance. And what you see on the screen is really some kind of ways that I have coped and overcome imposter syndrome in my own life. And so the first thing is it's really getting to know myself. When I think about when my career started, and you already talked about how I studied in business school, and that was my aim, was to be, a businesswoman in corporate America. I really had to do my own, I guess, self-inventory and really determine what are my gifts, what are my talents, what are my skills, what do I like, what don't I like, right? And then learn how to embrace all of that and accept that. So I think for me, when you experience self-doubt, sometimes you just haven't embraced who you are. You haven't kind of learned how to live in your own skin and show up as your authentic self. So I think that's probably the work that takes the longest time, but I think it's foundational when you talk about imposter syndrome. You want to be comfortable in your own skin. And I think self-acceptance and authenticity is a key way to make that happen.
The word authenticity is heard very frequently these days, and it's a good word. And if we can be authentic in the settings we find ourselves, then of course we'll be more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Here's my question regarding authenticity. Sometimes your authentic self is not welcome in a place where you find yourself. So what does one do in such case? Do you be the imposter? Should you play the imposter? Or should you change jobs, change places, move to a different place? What should one do?
Great question. I think it depends, to be quite honest. So I think about thinking about myself when in my formative years of being a young adult. And again, I'd mentioned earlier that faith is a very big part of my life and kind of the lens I look at. And I find for me, a key for me being authentic is being who God created me to be and discovering who that is and being that person unashamedly. But I think to assess whether you stay or you go, I think it depends. So if you're in an environment that really is the antithesis of who you really are, or your actual gifts and talents and skills don't align with that, you may want to look for a different environment. But if you're in an environment where you're kind of challenged, I think for me, and I get this from, I think my father, honestly, is like when those kind of challenges come and it's like, I don't accept you. It's like, I'm not going to make you accept me, but I'm also not going to make you run me off, and like, I'm going to show up as me and choose to have the courage to do that. And I feel like when we do that, and especially if you're in situations where maybe you're one of the few, so whether that's gender or ethnicity or age, it's very easy to feel like, oh, I don't belong here, I've got to go. But if you choose to stay, especially if it's not a toxic environment or things of that nature, you're actually creating a path for others that are like you to come after you. So being a trailblazer, sometimes requires you to be in situations where you do kind of stick out and you are the odd person out. So that's what I would say. I would say assess what's really the situation. Is it just it doesn't align with who you are, so you need to move on? Or is it just, hey, you're in trailblazer mode, right? And so you may want to stay to create a path for others that are like you.
Well, 𝐿akeisha, you went to a topic that we should discuss further. When you're the odd one out, you're the single person representing all of your clan, all of your community. Sometimes you need a safe space. What's your feelings about safe spaces for minority race or othered persons?
Great. That's a great question. You know what? I've been blessed that throughout my career, for the most part, I have had those safe spaces where I've worked. So I've never been in a situation where it's been antagonistic or negative. Now, I have been in spaces where I know I'm one of the few, and it's obvious. And I think when you're used to being one of the few, you get used to that feeling and you learn how to manage it. But I'm thankful that I haven't dealt directly with very negative reactions. But to answer your question, I think a safe space is to find a colleague at work that is in your corner. I have had leadership throughout my career that have been supportive, so I know that they are in my corner. And then personally, you have to have safe spaces even outside of your workspace, if that's the space that we're talking about, to kind of decompress if you get to that point, or maybe get some coaching. Going back to my parents are that for me, and my dad in particular, because of his, great career that he has had. So I do like leadership coaching with him, like, hey, I'm experiencing this. How should I react? So having those mentors who've gone ahead is also helpful.
Now, in the case of students, and since we are both passionate about student success in higher education, or K-12, and as I say, PK-20, all the way through, does UT Health have safe spaces for other students, so to speak?
Absolutely. So it's reflected in different ways. So we have everything from student organizations that are specific affinity groups for specific types of students in a variety of ways, whether it's gender differences, professions, religion. So we have those kind of safe spaces that students create, amongst themselves. We also have a really great resource, even like our student counseling center, who do great workshops and create those support groups to be that safe space for students, regardless of what their, unique identities are. So we definitely have that. We have great student affairs teams in each school that provide support as well. So I think our institution does a great job of providing those outlets if and when students need them.
Great. Well, let's talk more about coping skills that students can develop to address imposter phenomenon. So practice lifelong learning, closing gaps.
So I talked about earlier the example of when I was in a new position and I realized I was experiencing self-doubt because I just lacked competency. And competency doesn't mean like you're completely incompetent in general, but it's just like any new role or any experience that you have, you're not coming into that new experience knowing everything you need. So you have to build your competency. So for students, I would say it depends upon that gap. So that comes back to the self-awareness piece. Is it something that you can study? Is it something you can read a book in? Do you need to talk to, again, a mentor or someone that's gone ahead of you? For me and my particular experience, it's really been a lot of trainings. I avail myself to workshops. I avail myself to conferences. I avail myself to books and literature. So in any area where I feel like I have a gap and I need to fill it, for me, it's going to be a knowledge-based gap. And I do whatever I can to expose myself to the information that I need to fill that gap. So I think Dr. Johnson has jumped off for a few minutes. So we'll wait and see if he can come back to us.
Lakeisha, are you there?
I am.
Lakeisha, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Lakeisha, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. I'm trying to get back to where we were.
Okay.
I'm trying to add the slide.
Okay.
Everything is in slow motion, delayed. You click something and 3 minutes later it comes in. Okay, where were we? that was a trip around the block.
That's okay. We finished with talking about the competency gap and how, I use basically learning, different ways to help to fill that gap if that's an issue that I'm facing.
And what's living outside the box?
Absolutely. So, you asked earlier, like, how did I get from, an MBA grad to educator? And one of the ways I did that, and this goes back again to fighting imposter phenomenon, is not boxing yourself in. And this comes with labels. If I would have looked at myself and said, I'm a business school grad, I can only do these things and nothing else outside of that, I would have missed out on a very just enjoyable career that I've had so far. So if you want to get outside of imposter syndrome, I feel like you have to do it. Can't lock yourself in and say, well, I can't do that because I only do this. You have to be able to say, I'm not living in a box. I'm going to be able to explore my gifts, my talents, my skills fully. And what I've found is I've still brought a lot of my business school training into my career as an educator, particularly as I've gotten into more administrator roles. So getting myself out of the box and not limiting myself or labeling myself has really freed me to be able to operate again as my full self. And that's really helped me with overcoming imposter phenomena.
Now, how do you impart those skills and attitudes to students?
That's a great question. So I actually had a conversation with a student recently, and the student was looking at different populations that she wanted to work with. She was a speech language pathologist, and she was looking at going into a clinical setting, but her passion is actually to be a speech language pathologist in the K through 12 space, which, with those who are not familiar with special education, that is a service that's offered to certain students that need it. So she's trying to do what her parent wanted her to do, but you can tell that her heart was in being in the K through 12 space. So what I tried to do was speak to what I heard, which was her passion and what she cared about, what was important to her. And so that's the way I do it, is I try to, and I've done this throughout my career, I try to encourage the students to listen to their authentic self and to not be afraid to explore that, even if you have others in your, that are influencers in your life that may want something different. So that's an example. I try to coach them up with, if this is what you really want to do, try it. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. But at least you've explored what you're passionate about, and you're not limiting yourself based upon what someone else thinks you should or shouldn't do.
Now, how does a student align goals with personal and professional identity?
So what I found in my experience is, once I've accepted who I am and I'm being my authentic self, I've fulfilled the competency gap that I feel might be causing the self-doubt that I'm experiencing with imposter phenomena. And I've practiced kind of taking the labels off and living outside the box. Now I've got to align my goals with what I've learned about myself. So I'll give an example from my life. When I realized that I actually really enjoyed student affairs and I enjoyed the field of education, I had to almost let go of my goal of being in corporate America and align my professional goals with what I felt was in alignment with my passions and what I'm designed for. So that's another thing. You have to be willing, as we know, you're going to go, development is a lifelong path, and we're not created to be static and just be one thing forever. So as we continue to grow and evolve and develop, we're going to have to change some things. And so you can't be afraid to say, this path is no longer serving me anymore. I need to align myself now with what's really serving me in this season or in this place of my own personal development.
Now, Lakeisha, here's a question that might seem like it's coming from outfield.
Okay.
I asked earlier, how do you impart these attitudes and skills and coping skills to students? I come here with a variety of experiences, and one was many years service in the Air Force. And the military has a lot of exercises specifically designed to build confidence. And I've worked in higher education too, and I've been dabbling in student affairs at various times. And I wonder, do you have some exercises or some strategies or places where we lead students so that the result of their experience is increased confidence?
Oh, great question. So yes, so we have had a leadership development program that we hosted for many years, especially pre-pandemic, that I think really helped with that. So we had them do strength finders assessments. We had them learn on utilizing their strengths and also learning how to collaborate with others that have different strengths than their own. So that's an example of, like, programmatically what we've done. I think also on our campus, the Student Counseling Center has been a great resource in that they can help students process their development and process what they're learning about themselves. And so that actually, in their workshops, they have a lot of great resources on our campus. I've also worked in four-year academic environments as well. So career centers are also a great place to explore. When I was an academic advisor many years ago, I would have students that were basically failing their business classes. And when I would talk with them, they really wanted to be a filmmaker, but they never explored that part of themselves to see that that's where they really should be. So utilizing those kind of campus-wide services, I think, can help with building confidence, because you're talking about, this is where I'm at as a student. This is what I'm dealing with. Help me process and unpack what I'm dealing with so that I can make decisions that align with what I'm really designed to do. We all have been given gifts and talents and abilities. And sometimes we try to force ourselves to fit again in certain boxes for different reasons. But when you learn who you are and you're making decisions from that place, your confidence is going to build. I could never be an accountant, even though I studied it in business school, because even though I can handle numbers, I'm not passionate about numbers. I would never have confidence being an accountant. But being
and I would say that leads directly to feeling like an imposter. If you're doing something that you're not designed to do, let's say.
Right. Like either you love numbers or you don't, you're not, so it's like knowing yourself. Really, it seems so simple, but I think if we make decisions from that place, then we end up putting ourselves in situations where the confidence is there because we're doing what we love, what we're designed to do. And then we build our competency along the way to get the skills that we need to align with all of that.
Yeah. We're going to run over just so that we can cover all these topics. I think they're very important, and we want to make sure that persons have the benefit of the knowledge and experience you had. So how about your last bullet? Prepare for future growth and opportunities.
Absolutely. So when I went through all these other 4 items that I've listed, inevitably what happens is you get more responsibility. You get more opportunities. So I'll give an example.
The reward for good work is more work.
So that is the biggest compliment. Your leadership can trust you with more because you've done well where you're at. And when you read my bio, you see just a few of the things that I do as roles, and there's not the other duties as assigned that I didn't list that come with that. I think about, scripture in particular, and there is a passage where basically there's a master that has servants and he's given them different amounts of talents. And basically what they've done is they've invested those talents. Some of them did, and it came back with more. And he said, you've basically, because you've been faithful over a few things, now I'll make you ruler over many. When you learn how to do well with where you're at, you're going to get more opportunities and growth. So just be prepared for that. When you overcome imposter syndrome, more opportunities are going to come your way.
That's great. Well, it looks like we lost our slide.
Oh, it's okay.
All kinds of stuff tonight. Gee,
I know.
Oh, there we go. That's back up now. There
Yeah.
we go. All right. So, Lakeisha, we've talked about a lot of different things tonight. And if you could boil it down to one takeaway, what might it be?
I think the main takeaway is just to become comfortable in your own skin. Self-doubt goes away when you're comfortable with who you are, with your skills, with your abilities. And so that would be my main. If you can do anything on here, that's where you want to start. Learn about, and especially for students, what are your talents? What are your gifts? What are your skills? What do you like? What do you want to do? And then go from there. So that's what I would say. Be your authentic self, and everything else is going to fall into place.
And what's the call to action? What do you want people to do with all of this good information?
I really want them to have strategies. Like you mentioned earlier, imposter syndrome is not something that's unique. It's something that a lot of us have experienced, and it's something that may come up multiple times in your life and in your career. So like anything, when you overcome something, you've got a blueprint. You're like, okay, when this comes again next time, I know how to address that. So that's what I will say. I would say pick one or more of these items the next time you feel like the imposter. And the more you do some of these things, and hopefully all of these, you'll see that you'll have the blueprint for when you experience it again in the future.
And if people want to know more, how do they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So on the screen, you'll see I am on LinkedIn. So please feel free to connect with me. And my email is on the screen as well. So happy to chat with anyone that would like to.
Well, thank you for being here with us this evening, 𝐾𝐨𝐧'𝐭 D. Johnson, and you could be my sister. MBA is
You never
director.
know. You never know.
Is director, Office of Student Life at UT Health in San Antonio, Texas. I'm David Johnson, Transform Ed Consulting, and I'd like to thank my dear colleague, Cassandra Williams from Educational Innovation 360 Degrees for allowing us to use her channel. It's been great talking with you, 𝐾𝐨𝐧'𝐭. You have a great evening.
Same here. You do the same, David.